Barry Silverthorn was driving home from work late one night when something rushed at his car. He swerved to avoid it and skidded off the road. It was a dangerous moment on a long commute. That's when Barry decided there had to be a better way to make a living as a television editor. What Barry did next provided him with a good living outside the shrinking broadcast industry in Canada, working on material he loved. Barry didn't just find the holy grail of visual storytelling, he created it. Well, it's tough times in television right now. There aren't that, the industry's shrinking a little bit. We've had some bleed from streaming services, some government regulations helped us. But in the midst of all of this change, there's a guy right there, who figured out how to make content he loves without interference from a broadcaster and, make a living doing it. His name is Barry Silverthorn. He created Trainmasters TV, and he's going to tell us all about it. Before we get into all of that great stuff, because I want to hear about it so that I can try to replicate it for myself. Tell me about that drive home and the accident. What happened there?
I finished a shift. It was around midnight. I was making a 35-kilometer trip back home, and out of the darkness, something jumped out at the vehicle, and I went to swerve around it, and that was my biggest mistake. I probably, unfortunately, should have hit it. I went towards the shoulder, and as soon as I hit the shoulder, I could see a tree coming at me, and the front tire dug in, and the truck did a 90-degree and then rolled in someone's yard. So I'm lucky I didn't hit the tree. But when I got out of the truck and dusted myself off, I said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. There's no reason for me to be on the road at midnight. Not where I am in my career right now.
Yeah, at some point, these things make a difference. So what decision did you make then? I mean, obviously you said I got to do something different. What thought process did you go through?
Well, it took some time after that. I'd been working on a show about classic cars. And
I know it well. I was the executive producer on that for the broadcaster, but go ahead.
Style and Steel, it was called.
Beautiful show.
At the end of the run, I went to the people I was working with and I said, we might be able to get ourselves another season of work out of this if we create a similar show, and we'll take the tires off and put steel wheels on and put it on rails and do the same show about the history and culture of trains in North America. And I had prepared a treatment. I had put together a pitch with some of the stories we could do. And I went out on my own and did a 7-minute sample story. And that was submitted to the network.
It came to me, yeah.
Yeah, and apparently it was well received, but the word was that the network was making some changes and those kinds of shows weren't going to be done anymore. So I kind of sat there, and when the accident happened, I thought, might not be able to get a network to give us, thousands of dollars to make a show like this, but if I find an audience in my interest, which was trains, I might be able to find maybe 25,000 people that will give us $1. So the outcome would be the same. And the thing I thought that was really nice about it was that we wouldn't, because our audience would be niche, they would already know about the material, that would be in their interest as well. We would never have to talk down to our audience. Okay, so when we talked about an SD40 locomotive, we didn't have to explain what that was. They would know a little bit about locomotives, they would know a little bit of the terminology. And that, to me, there was a real what's the word? There was some passion in that for me because I've been doing model trains all my life. So
you decided I have an idea of what the audience might be for this, and it went from the big trains that was in the pitch that you put together to model trains, correct?
Right, because in order to launch something like that, I don't have the resources myself, and there's not enough people locally around me that I could do the promotion of that to launch it. And then the costs were just way over what my Visa card would handle.
Yeah.
So what I did was I found a magazine, that was an online magazine. So they were already pretty progressive. They didn't have a paper version. And
What year was this?
Sorry?
What year was this?
This was 2013, spring
Right.
of 2013. So they were already kind of progressive that way, and that they didn't believe that paper was the future. And I had just contacted them at a time when they were looking at a way to launch a video channel. Their competition, who did have an online presence and a paper magazine presence, was doing the same thing. And they saw the writing on the wall that in order to compete with them, I mean, their competition had been around since the 1940s. They would have to have a video channel of their own. So they were like me. They didn't have the resources to launch the video channel. I didn't have the portal to find the viewers. So it seemed like a pretty good match. So I partnered up with Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine and launched Trainmasters TV as under their umbrella.
And what did you tell them this show would be like?
Well, I think they understood right away because they were describing it as Netflix for model train enthusiasts. So I think they already knew, and I had given them some samples of what we could do. We would do documentary stories about full-size prototype trains. We would do layout visits to people's basements where we would see what they were doing in the hobby. We would have clinics and bring in guests from around North America and have our own hosts. And we would do model train shows. So we would be out kind of in the community of the hobby, and we'd be seeing what they're doing. And they totally understood it, and they were on board right away, which is great for me. I didn't have to explain to them any more than I had to explain to my viewers what it was about.
Well, that is just gold. And so what was the next step after that?
The next step after that was unbelievably just to go out and lease some equipment and find some talent to be on camera. This is the wonderful thing about where technology is now. I was looking earlier today at years ago, in the 80s, I had a single tube camera and a 3/4 inch videotape machine. And back in 1986, that would have cost you, that outfit with lighting and microphones would have cost you about $20,000 just for a very basic package to go out and shoot in the field. Nowadays, you can set up an entire studio for that amount and an editing system to go with it, and you're on the air. So this term, the democratization of media, has made it possible for anybody to really, do their own production and find their audience and put it out there on a platform online. If you have a group of people, with like-minded interests, and some of them have the talent and the confidence to be on camera, and you can lease some equipment, without having to outlay a large amount of capital, you can launch something pretty quickly. And so I went from that, talking to them in the spring. By August, I had set up a studio and was starting to produce content, and we launched in November of that year. So
where did you build this studio?
Right here in my basement. I have 8-foot ceilings. It's not ideal for a studio, but if you're creative with the lighting and the sets, there's a lot you can do just in space that doesn't cost you a lot. And there's no way I could have afforded to go out and rent a commercial space that would have allowed me to have a studio. Not to mention, and this is a problem I found when I was growing. I have all the resources right here. I have a workshop with tools. I have models stacked up of my own that when I need a part, I can go into my own stash and pull something out that we can use for a clinic to paint or whatever. And in order to have a studio, I would have had to duplicate that somewhere else, right? So having it already here where everything else was really made it handy, especially the editing, because I could edit all day and then output at night. Well, if I had to, go have dinner and then come back and output the segment and upload it, I'd have to go back to work. Working at home allowed me to do lots of other things with my time while I was waiting for the computer to do its work, right?
So people who may be watching this years later may guess we're in COVID times just from my televangelist hair that I have right now. But you were way ahead of the curve on working from home when you started this show. Right.
And, I love it. And, I see that a lot of other people have discovered this. And so many times before I did it, I worked with people who said, oh, we need to have you here. And I said, well, I have an editing system at home. I could work 4 days a week and come in maybe 1 day a week, for meetings and things like that. And they were like, no, we need you here. And it's proven that that doesn't have to happen. And I think millions of people across North America have proven that they can work at home, be productive, and sometimes more gets done.
Yeah. I mean, when I was working at home, freelancing in television, I was talking to one editor that I worked with, and he said, you actually do more work at home. You end up working like 12, 14 hours a day because it's right there. And then you stop for dinner and you do this. But so anyway, I think everybody knows what that's about now. But to go back to your story, you've got a studio set up in your basement. You've got your edit suite set up. You're doing some remote pieces. You find a host. Who did you find for hosts?
I just tapped people that I knew in the hobby who were very outgoing. So they needed to have a knowledge base that they could ask the right questions when a clinic's happening with our guests. But they also had to have a little bit of savvy for being on camera, knowing how to speak to the audience, knowing what was going on, what the viewer was seeing as they were talking, trying to imagine it in their head. And I tapped some really good people. I found actually one person who worked in radio, who was easily able to switch over to video. I found Rick Green, formerly of the Frantics, and several other shows, who is a model train guy. And he was happy to sign up as a host and did a fantastic job. And nice thing was that, model trains, people are a little geeky. We are. And, his audience from the past were a little geeky. So there was a lot of crossover. People recognized him for what he did.
Barry, everybody's a geek about something. I started my career at TSN, and you couldn't find a bigger bunch of geeks about sports. Matter of fact, if you didn't speak that language, you weren't surviving in that room. So, and it sounds like you had exactly the same thing in your train show. You had people who were passionate about the subject, and that's a great place to start anything.
Yeah, you can't fake that. I looked at hiring some hosts who had actually more on-camera experience and maybe doing some scripting so that they could just read a script. But I realized it just wasn't going to work.
Certainly not for a niche audience like yours, right?
Well, they can see right through it.
And one of the things we've learned, now in the YouTube era is what really matters more than polish is, passion and knowledge.
For sure. Yeah. And, people will forgive you for a lot of that, right? But the other thing is that when they're paying a monthly fee, they also have a certain expectation as far as the professionality of people on camera and what's presented too. So you've got to deliver on that.
So did you put them together? Did you release them as short items or put them together in shows?
We did it. It's a subscription service, but like Netflix, it's everything. You get everything. It's not monthly. We looked at doing it monthly. Actually, I probably would have liked to have tried it, but once you try that, you can't go back. So it was when you sign up for a year, you have access to the entire library. And at first, we had to kind of give people a little bit of a break on the price because we didn't have a huge library. The idea was to release 60 to 90 minutes every month. That was our goal, and that's what we promised people. And some months we were doing 2 hours, 2.5 hours, when we had a lot of longer segments, but we never went under 70 minutes, which,
So you'd release them as segments rather than a half-hour package show.
Yeah. So every month would be a complete show, and we would release it one segment every week. So at the month, you had basically a show made up of 4 segments, much like a TV show. And that's one thing that we found important with our audience, because a lot of most of the people in the hobby are 50 years and older. And so the language of a TV show works for them more than short pieces like a YouTube video and things that aren't linear. They really understand the linear idea of a TV show because that's the language we grew up in, right? Mm-hmm. So if you waited to the end of the month and sat down and watched all 4 segments, you got an opening teaser, you got the first segment, and then a tease for the next segment, and then you would play the next segment, and then all the way to the 4th segment with credits in it, just like a TV show. So it had a very familiar feeling to people, and I think it elevated it above a typical YouTube video because that's what a lot of the people in the hobby get for free. And I like to think that the TV show format made them feel like they were getting something that was more than just something that was done in somebody's basement and thrown up online.
Well, you're dealing with craftspeople, right?
Sorry?
you're dealing with people who craft things. And
Right.
so they would appreciate something that's crafted.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
And so just to be clear, you'd release them as individual items, but then you would package them into a show at the end.
Well, the way the platform worked was at the end we could program. We used Uscreen, which is a platform for broadcasting online, and we can set it up just like a Netflix interface where you have the rows and everything's divided into categories, and so people could watch individual segments, but we also had for example, January 2020 as a thumbnail. When you click on that, it would autoplay all the 4 segments together. So it was brainless. You just sat down, poured yourself a coffee, or sat down in front of on your workbench and worked away, and it's playing right in front of you sequentially the whole show for an hour and a half.
So you didn't have to do that at all.
No, all I had to do, and the people at the magazine, they ran that platform for me. So I could concentrate just on production, which is what I do best, I guess. And so all I had to do was upload it, and they set it up so that it would autoplay, or they would divide it into categories on the Uscreen platform for me.
Wow, that's fantastic. Just what were some popular items that you would run?
By far, the layout tours of people's models in their basement were the most popular. Because people want to be inspired, right? They want to know the techniques, but there's nothing better to get you at your workbench doing something, or into the basement working on your railroad, than seeing what someone else has done and saying, "Oh, I could do that," right? And we produced them in a documentary style. We had a voiceover. They were all scripted with interviews, and then tons of B-roll, which is the visuals of all their model railroad. Cut over top of their interview. So you got a very personal, up close interview with the person about their work. You got some context, because a lot of model railroads are based on actual railroads. So we would do historical context on the real railroad that it was based on. So there's a lot of storytelling involved. And I'm an editor, and usually my job is I get a producer of a story comes and brings the script, and they bring the footage, and I assemble it to their script. I had to learn. I had to learn storytelling, and I had to learn some of the things that they were doing, when I worked for producers before, that were useful, that I could put into play, that I never really thought I would ever have. It would never be my job to know. I call myself a reluctant producer because I don't see myself as a producer, but I had to be. I had to wear all the hats.
Can you give me an example of what one of those things might be?
Well, one thing I learned from somebody I used to work with, he used to pre-interview his subjects that he was going to interview, and he would write a script based on that interview, just as he thought his story should go, because he knew the material after interviewing them. And then he would formulate questions so that he would get the answers that were in his script. And what he said was 9 times out of 10, when he would ask a question, they would almost verbatim answer him what he wrote, they thought they would say. And the first time I did that, I edited a 7 or 9 minute story in one day, and that has never happened. But it worked because everything was already laid out, and I just had to basically slot everything in where it went, because I'd pre-visualized what the story was going to be. So, you learn these things through osmosis over the years, and then all of a sudden you find yourself using them.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 things in television: planning and execution. And planning is actually cheap, and execution is expensive. You plan in research, you plan in writing, you execute in shooting, you execute in editing. And because you're paying for people and equipment in shooting and editing, that's expensive.
Yeah. And
so
as an editor, the term I've heard most is, we'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in the editing process. And, any editor will tell you their head explodes, because they know it's not going to be easy to do that. So you might as well fix it before you shoot it, for sure.
Oh yeah, all the planning. And as you know from this, I pre-interviewed you before we did this. I pre-interview everybody, so you don't spend a lot of time fishing.
Yeah. And I had a host who said, "I don't want to know anything about what we're going to be doing in this clinic today." And I said, "You're going to end up in trouble." And it'll be a better clinic if you know where we're going, because you'll know what questions to ask and you won't miss anything, right?
Mm-hmm. So you've got this great show going. You've got a client, you've got an audience, you're doing what you love, you're making money. The last time we talked before we reconnected recently, you were looking to sell these shows to people. Now that you have this intellectual property in these shows, now you're selling it.
Yeah. You start to realize, holy cow, I got a lot of stuff built up here. Like, 62 shows, 4 segments each, and bonus materials. Like, that starts to become a big number. And I wanted to grow Train Masters to a bigger audience. I felt that what we were doing was good enough that it could find a larger audience if it had more promotion and maybe found a more general audience. And I quickly learned, because I'm not a businessman, and I learned as I went along, that if you want to grow 50%, it's sometimes it's not possible. You have to grow a lot if you're going to grow. And one example was the studio. If I wanted to move into a bigger studio and have a nicer place to work, then all the tools have to be duplicated at that facility, right? And now you're looking into some of the things that are shared with the house, like an alarm system, for example. Now you've got to duplicate that. So, the cost of expanding just a little bit was beyond, again, what was in any budget I had to work with. And so I went looking for possibly somebody who wanted to do what we were doing with Train Masters, but do it on a larger scale. And I found that not a lot of people were doing that, And I started to think, is what I'm doing so far ahead of the curve that the rest of the world isn't with that yet? Have I got to wait for it to catch up? Or is what I'm doing so niche that nobody's interested in that? People are interested in golf and yoga and things that are really popular, but they don't want to do a niche thing like model trains, which oddly, at one time, model trains used to be the second biggest hobby in North America behind stamp collecting. But that was decades ago, right? So things have changed a lot.
But it's still popular, just by the fact that you could do, how many episodes you do? 62?
62, yeah.
62 episodes with a client, with a customer and an audience. That's something.
Yeah. And part of the problem is that all the people who do the hobby are pretty much in their basement. So you don't see them on the golf course. You don't see them at a car show, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a hobby full of introverts too.
So you couldn't scale it up. Were you able to sell the series to anybody?
Well, what I eventually did was I decided I wanted to do some other things. It was getting increasingly hard to travel across the border for me because, everything, the larger audience was in the States. So, they've got 9 or 10 times the content in the States. So I had to travel south of the border. And what I found, it was getting really, maybe not so hard, but I was getting a lot of anxiety having to cross the border and explain what I was doing. And who do you work for? Is this going to be aired in the U.S.? And what network do you work for? And traditionally, if you work in TV and you're a crew, you cross the border with a letter from the network that says, this is a Canadian production. It's being funded by Canadians. These people are being paid by Canadians. And that usually gets you across pretty quickly. My problem as the producer, distributor, network owner, really, was I would have to write that letter myself. And if they decided to call the number on the bottom of the letter, my cell phone would ring and I would have to answer the phone. So it just, the rules as far as, crossing the border and shooting haven't changed with the times. And so that made it extremely difficult for me to go to the States to shoot. So, and, I thought after 5 years, I had probably done enough with it and wanted to try some new things. So I did a deal with the magazine that was my partner, and they ended up licensing the content. And I produced some more clinics for them in the basement for 2 more years. I did that for the shows every month because I really like doing the clinics. I really like having people come in. We go for pizza, and it's a great day. It's a great day. So I got to do that for a couple more years. But as of December of 2020, I passed it all over to them, and it's their baby now. And I'm extremely proud of what I've done, because it's not in my wheelhouse to be all those things I had to be. I could do some camera. I'm an editor, but I had to learn to write. I had to learn to produce. I had to learn to make a lot of decisions that I never had to make before. But the beauty was, once I made a decision, there was no one over my shoulder saying, "Oh, we think you should change the color from magenta to purple." The decisions were made, and there's a huge satisfaction in that freedom of being able to make your own thing.
That is the dream. The
Yeah.
most fun I've ever had on shows is when I've had the least supervision.
Yeah. And, we're living in a time when it's possible. And I'm really surprised when I hear, people in the TV industry saying, I could lose my job, or, we got shuffled over here, or, I know someone who's not working now. I'm really surprised that some of those creative people haven't gotten together and said, we can do something like this, and we can run our own show.
Yeah. I mean, it's always, find a customer and find an audience. What is the takeaway for those of us in TV who are, tearing our clothes and shaking our fists at the gods? What do you have to tell us?
Wow, it's like a financial advice. Financial advice, right? This is not financial advice, but yeah, look at what you can do with the resources you have available, the people you know. I think there are a lot of people that are much more well connected than I am, and I ever was. And I'm 2 hours outside of Toronto, and that was a handicap for me. If I'd been in Toronto, I could have accomplished, I think, a lot more. I would have had a lot more opportunities. So if I can pull this off, in my basement with 3 cameras that I leased, using, I go to Home Depot and buy some lumber, and I build a set out of like burlap and plywood, whatever I can find. If I can do this, then anybody with a team of people can certainly do, a lot more. And, the opportunities are there. There's a huge gap between Netflix and YouTube. And it's not being filled. And there's a way to monetize it that's way better than what YouTube wants to offer you. But you just need to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and it can be done.
What's next for you?
I'm still working at home. During one of our shoots here in the basement, we did a Project Railroad, and we did some lighting on the railroad. And I got really into lighting structures, which was not something I normally do. But I realized there was an opportunity. Seems everybody in the hobby, well, there are thousands of buildings on their railroads, and there are no interiors inside. And the detail outside is so fantastic. But if you like the interiors and add a little bit of detail inside, things really pop. So I developed a product, and this is not a plug. I realize there's nobody in the hobby watching this probably, but these are a laser cut cardstock that fold up into a box. And then there's an LED that goes into the ceiling, and the room goes inside a building, and it piggybacks on another manufacturer's product that's already out there. So you can just plug my product into theirs, dim the lights, and you have an interior inside your building. So
you took it to the next level.
I've taken it to a level that nobody else has, and in some ways it's a challenge because it's a product that doesn't exist. You have a challenge of having to educate people why they need it, and in some cases it's like, because they have no reference for it, I swear they don't even see it, right? But people who've tried them seem to love them because they keep coming back for more, which is great. I love it.
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm finding out. I've been entrepreneurial for a short while, but you often find out that when you start doing something, especially something you love and you're not sure and you're figuring it out, it can often lead to something else.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are lots of tangents I can go down, in this hobby, and, who knows, maybe in a couple of years I'll find an owner for this and I'll try something new. But I think that says a lot about my personality, is I'm a starter. I am not an entrepreneur. I'm certainly not a business person. I have no business training at all. Actually, I found today my my report card from high school, and I got 71% in marketing. So I have no training and I don't know what I'm doing, but I think when you love something a lot and when you think you have a good idea and when you have fun creating, I mean, just creating a logo and packaging, right? That's part of the creative process.
Mhm.
And there's satisfaction in that as well. So anything creative, if you can make it fly and get it to pay your rent, go for it.
Well, Barry, I mean, you say you're not a businessman, you say you weren't a producer, but you learned to produce, you learned a business, you created a job for yourself where one didn't exist in an industry that's having a lot of trouble. You made something you love and are proud of, that you're passionate about. And as far as I'm concerned, man, that makes you a business hero. Barry, thank you so much for joining us today. I love hearing what you're doing. Love this story. It's very inspiring for me. And thank you for sharing it with everybody.
Yeah, I hope someone got something out of it.
Well, I did.
Okay.
Thanks so much. The Business Heroes wants to hear your story. Contact me at craig@colbyvision.net. I guarantee your story will sound epic with this cool music underneath it. Colby Vision can help you find and share your story. Writing, video, we do it all. We can also show you how to do your own simple videos and teach you how to do interviews for a podcast. Thanks to Dave White for the editing, Tim Vesely for the music, and Kevin Francisco for the graphics. And thanks for watching The Business Heroes. We'll see you next time for another exciting adventure.